Cassian, you must announce the Luna, the elder's voice echoed, silencing the murmurs of 1,000 gathered wolves. Lisa stood in the shadows of the velvet drapery, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The mate bond hummed beneath her skin, a golden thread of pure energy pulling her toward the Alpha King. He stepped up to the dais. His piercing gray eyes scanned the vast room, skipping right over her hidden alcove. "My Luna," Cassian declared, his voice a deep, resonant thunder that rattled the crystal chandeliers. "Ilara of the Silver Crescent." The golden thread snapped. It didn't just break. It shattered, sending a visceral shockwave of agony through Lisa's chest. She felt him choose another. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just turned away, slipping into the cold night. And she vanished. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave of approval from the allied packs that crashed against the marble walls of the grand hall. Cassian stood at the center of the dais, the heavy gold of the Alpha's signet ring biting into his knuckle as he gripped the podium. Beside him, Ilara smiled, a picture of aristocratic perfection, her hand reaching out to gracefully rest over his forearm. Cassian didn't look at her. He was waiting for the tether, the invisible, vibrating hum in his blood that had kept him sane for the past 6 months. He had accepted the political alliance with the Silver Crescent to secure his borders, a logical, cold calculation designed to save hundreds of his warriors from a looming territorial war. He had planned to go to Lisa tonight. He had planned to fall to his knees, to explain that a title was just a title, but that his soul belonged entirely to her. He had arrogantly believed the mate bond could withstand the semantics of pack law. But as Ilara's fingers brushed his sleeve, a terrifying, absolute silence descended upon Cassian's mind. The warmth in his chest, a comforting fire that had burned steadily since the day he first caught Lisa's scent of pine and rain, extinguished. It was as if someone had plunged a hand into his ribcage and ripped out a vital organ. He staggered, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath hissing through his teeth. "Cassian?" Ilara whispered, her smile faltering as she leaned closer. "Are you all right?" He couldn't hear her. The blood roaring in his ears drowned out the music, the cheers, the clinking of champagne glasses. He reached inward, mentally casting his presence across the pack grounds, searching for that familiar golden thread. Nothing. It wasn't just muted. It was gone. A vast, echoing void had taken its place, leaving behind a phantom pain that made his knees buckle. "Alpha?" Elder Thorn stepped forward, his brows knitting together in concern. Cassian ignored him. He shoved past Ilara, ignoring her startled gasp as she nearly lost her footing. He descended the steps of the dais in 3 massive strides, his eyes wild, shifting from human gray to the lethal, glowing amber of his wolf. The crowd parted instantly, the celebratory mood shattering into confused, terrified murmurs as the Alpha King stalked through the ballroom. "Lisa," he growled, the name tearing from his throat like a physical wound. He tracked her scent. It was faint, lingering near the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the hall. He tore the fabric aside, the velvet ripping from its brass hooks. The alcove was empty. A single crushed white rose lay on the marble floor, the same flower she had been wearing in her hair earlier that evening. Cassian dropped to one knee, picking up the bruised petals. Her scent here was spiked with a sharp, acidic tang of sudden heartbreak. And then, terrifyingly, it began to fade. "Lock down the perimeter," Cassian roared, spinning around to face his beta, Marcus, who had materialized at his side. "No one leaves. Close the gates. Ground all vehicles." "Cassian, what is happening?" Marcus asked, his hand dropping to the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "The ceremony? Forget the ceremony," Cassian snarled, his fangs lengthening, the civilized veneer of the king completely fracturing. "She's gone. Lisa is gone." "Gone? Who?" Elder Thorn had followed him, his face flushed with indignation. "Alpha, you are making a spectacle. Ilara is waiting." Cassian moved faster than the human eye could track. His hand clamped around the elder's throat, lifting the older man inches off the floor. The entire ballroom descended into a horrified silence. "If she has left these grounds," Cassian whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, lethal promise that echoed in the quiet hall. "I will burn this alliance to the ground, Thorn. I will burn it all to ash." He dropped the gasping elder and broke into a dead sprint toward the residential wing. He tore through the corridors, his boots slamming against the hardwood. He burst into Lisa's chambers. The room was immaculate. The bed was made. Her silver-backed hairbrush sat perfectly aligned on the vanity. He flung open the closet. It wasn't emptied, but the heavy winter coat she favored was missing. He pulled open her drawers. The small leather duffel bag she kept beneath her bed was gone. She hadn't just run out in a moment of panic. She had planned for this. She had known the moment he opened his mouth on that stage that he was going to betray her. And she had already packed her life into a single bag. Cassian stood in the center of the quiet room, the scent of pine and rain mocking him as it slowly dissipated into the sterile air of the estate. He sank onto the edge of her perfectly made bed, burying his face in his hands. The Alpha King, who commanded armies and ruled the continent, let out a raw, agonizing howl of pure devastation. He had chosen a crown, and in doing so, he had lost his world. The rain was a cold sheet of misery, slicing through the darkness and soaking Lisa to the bone. She didn't pull her hood up. She let the icy water plaster her dark hair to her cheeks, hoping it would numb the burning sensation radiating from the center of her chest. Every step away from the packed lands felt like a physical tearing of muscle and sinew. The mate bond wasn't just an emotional connection, it was a biological imperative. Severing it through physical distance while the rejection was still fresh was akin to walking on broken glass with bare feet. Her lungs burned. Her vision blurred at the edges, flashing with brief, chaotic images of Cassian's amber eyes. My Luna. Ilara. The memory of his voice through the loudspeakers chased her through the dense woods. Lisa tightened her grip on the strap of her leather duffel bag. She forced her legs to keep moving, her boots sinking into the wet mud. She knew the patrol routes. She knew the blind spots in the border security cameras. After all, she had spent the last 2 years running the Alpha's logistics while he built his empire. She knew his empire better than he did, which meant she knew exactly how to slip out of it unnoticed. She crossed the physical boundary line, a deep, rushing creek that separated the pack's private forest from the state highway. The moment her boots hit the asphalt on the other side, a wave of profound nausea hit her. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as she retched into the wet grass. She was officially a rogue, unclaimed, unprotected. She wiped her mouth with the back of her trembling hand and forced herself to stand upright. The highway was empty, slick with rain and reflecting the sickly orange glow of distant streetlights. She began to walk north, toward the human city of Seattle. 2 hours later, shivering uncontrollably, Lisa stood beneath the flickering neon sign of an all-night diner situated next to a Greyhound bus terminal. The smell of stale coffee and diesel exhaust was overwhelming to her heightened senses, but she welcomed it. It smelled like the human world. It smelled like anonymity. She pushed through the glass doors, the bell jingling cheerfully overhead, a stark contrast to the absolute wreckage inside her. The diner was nearly empty. A tired waitress wiped down the counter. A truck driver snored softly in a back booth. Lisa slid into a booth near the window, giving her a clear view of the bus schedules glowing on a digital board outside. She pulled her wet coat tighter around herself, trying to suppress the violent shivers racking her frame. Coffee? The waitress was suddenly there, holding a steaming glass pot. She looked at Lisa's soaked clothes and pale face with mild pity. Rough night, honey? Yes, Lisa rasped. Her voice sounded entirely foreign to her, hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. Black, please. As the waitress poured, Lisa stared at her reflection in the dark, rain-streaked window. She looked like a ghost. The vibrant, fiercely loyal woman who had stood beside Cassian, who had believed in his vision of a united kingdom, was gone. In her place was a hollow shell, desperately trying to build walls around the bleeding cavern in her chest. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a burner phone. She had bought it 3 days ago, right after she had accidentally overheard Elder Thorne and Cassian arguing in the study about the Silver Crescent Alliance. Cassian had promised her he would fix it. He had promised he wouldn't yield to the elders. "I will never put another before you, Lisa. You are my soul." The memory tasted like ash. She stared at the small, cheap plastic phone. She hadn't activated it yet. If she turned her actual phone on, Cassian's trackers would have her location in less than 30 seconds. She pulled her real phone from her bag. The screen was cracked. She stared at the black glass for a long moment. Was he looking for her? Did he care? Or was he in the bridal suite with Alara, consummating the alliance, cementing the severing of their bond? A fresh wave of agony hit her, so intense it made her gasp out loud. The waitress looked over sharply. Lisa shook her head, forcing a weak, apologetic smile, and looked back down. She couldn't afford to care if he was looking. She couldn't afford to be weak. If he found her now, he would drag her back. He would expect her to be his secret, his mistress, while Alara paraded as his queen. He would use the intoxicating power of the mate bond to break her resolve. Lisa gripped her real smartphone, her knuckles turning white. With a sudden, decisive motion, she dropped it onto the floor beneath the table and brought the heel of her heavy boot down on it. The glass shattered. The internal components crunched. She slid the crushed remains under the radiator. She looked up at the digital board outside. Bus 402, departing for Portland, 3:15 a.m. Portland was big, raining, easy to disappear in. She threw a crumpled $20 bill on the table, abandoned the steaming coffee, and walked out into the rain. She bought her ticket with cash under the name Sarah Jenkins. As the heavy bus pulled out of the terminal, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt, Lisa pressed her forehead against the cold window. She watched the lights of the city fade into the darkness. She didn't look back. The Alpha King had made his choice. Now, Lisa was making hers. 3 weeks. 21 days of agonizing, absolute silence. The pack house, once a bustling epicenter of politics, laughter, and warmth, had become a mausoleum. The staff moved with their heads bowed, terrified of making a sound. The allied alphas had departed abruptly, deeply unsettled by the erratic, violent behavior of the newly crowned king. Cassian sat in the alpha's study, staring at the massive map of the North American territories spread across his mahogany desk. The map was covered in red pins. Every pin represented a dead end, a false sighting, a cold trail. He looked terrible. The sharp, aristocratic angles of his face had hollowed out. His gray eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark, bruised exhaustion. He hadn't slept for more than an hour at a time since the night of the ceremony. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty velvet curtains. He smelled crushed white roses. He woke up violently, his wolf clawing at the inside of his mind, demanding they find their mate. Alpha. Cassian didn't look up as Marcus entered the study. The beta stood at a respectful distance, his posture stiff. "Report," Cassian rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "The search teams in the Eastern Territories have returned. Nothing. The scent hounds lost the trail at the highway Border Creek on night 1. We've swept every pack within a 1,000-mile radius. None of the alphas are harboring her." Marcus paused, hesitating. "Cassian, you need to eat. You need to rest. The pack is feeling your instability. The younger wolves are getting restless." "Let them," Cassian growled, his eyes fixated on a cluster of red pins near the Canadian border. "If I am unstable, it is because half of my soul was ripped from my body." "You made a choice," Marcus said softly. It was a dangerous thing to say, but Marcus was the only one left who dared to speak the truth. "You chose the Alliance." Cassian's head snapped up. In a blur of motion, he crossed the room, slamming Marcus against the heavy oak door. The wood groaned under the impact. Cassian's forearm was pressed against his beta's throat, his eyes flashing amber. "I chose to protect our borders," Cassian roared, the sound vibrating with pure agony. "I chose to keep our people from being slaughtered by the southern packs. I thought she would understand. I thought the bond would hold us." "You thought you could have it all," Marcus choked out, holding Cassian's gaze without flinching. "You thought you could give her the shadows while another woman wore her crown. Lisa is proud, Cassian. She was never going to be your secret." Cassian's grip faltered. He stepped back, his chest heaving as the truth of Marcus's words pierced his delusion. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. He had underestimated her pride, her strength, and her absolute refusal to be second best. He turned away, raking a shaking hand through his unkempt hair. "Where is Alara?" Cassian asked quietly. "In the guest wing." "Still," Marcus replied, rubbing his throat. "She wants to return to the Silver Crescent. She says she is an Alpha's daughter, not a prisoner to a madman. The elders are demanding you consummate the union, or the treaty is void." "Tell the elders," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a lethally calm register, "that if they speak of that treaty again, I will tear their throats out myself. The treaty is dead. Alara may leave whenever she wishes." "Cassian, if the Silver Crescent pulls their support, I don't care," Cassian yelled, sweeping his arm across the desk. The map, the pins, the heavy crystal whiskey decanter, everything shattered against the far wall. "I don't care about the borders. I don't care about the crown. I want her back." He slumped into his leather chair, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow, echoing despair. "She's gone, Marcus. She's vanished like smoke." The heavy oak door creaked open tentatively. One of the pack's elite human trackers, a man named Vance, slipped into the room. He looked nervously at the shattered glass on the floor, then up at the Alpha King. "My king," Vance said, his voice trembling slightly. I think I have something." Cassian was out of his chair in a microsecond. He crossed the room, grabbing Vance by the shoulders with a grip that bruised. "Where?" "It's not a scent, sir," Vance stammered, holding up a transparent evidence bag. Inside was a small, crushed smartphone. "We finally pulled the security footage from an all-night human diner off Interstate 5. A waitress found this jammed under a radiator. It's thoroughly destroyed, but the tech team managed to pull the SIM card data." Cassian snatched the bag. He didn't need the tech team to confirm it. Even through the plastic underneath the smell of stale coffee and dust, he could catch the faintest ghostly trace of pine and rain. "Where?" Cassian demanded, his wolf surging forward, taking absolute control. "The diner is next to a bus terminal, sir," Vance said. "She bought a ticket under an alias. We tracked the alias. She went to Portland." Cassian's eyes narrowed, the amber glowing fiercely in the dim light of the study. She was in the human world. She thought she could hide among them. She thought the concrete and smog would mask her from him. "Prepare my jet," Cassian ordered, his voice cold, steady, and terrifyingly focused. "Assemble an extraction team, civilian clothing, no shifting unless absolutely necessary." "Cassian," Marcus warned, "Portland is a city of millions. If she doesn't want to be found..." "She is my mate," Cassian said, turning to look at his beta. The hollow despair was gone, replaced by a dark, obsessive hunger. "I don't care if I have to tear that city apart brick by brick. I am bringing her home." The heavy steel door of the commercial walk-in cooler slammed shut, sealing Lisa inside a world of 34 degrees and the overpowering scent of decaying eucalyptus. She stood in the center of the massive floral warehouse, her breath pluming in the frigid air. For 3 weeks, this had been her sanctuary. Working the graveyard shift at Pacific Blooms Wholesale offered everything a rogue wolf needed. No questions asked. cash under the table, and an environment so saturated with aggressive floral notes and industrial refrigeration that her own scent was entirely masked. Lisa pulled her wool beanie down over her ears and resumed stripping thorns from a bucket of imported roses. Her hands, once soft and manicured for royal banquets, were crisscrossed with tiny, unhealed cuts. She stared at a particularly deep gash on her thumb. It should have healed in seconds. A werewolf's regenerative abilities were legendary. But the flesh remained angry and red. Her wolf was dying. The realization wasn't dramatic. It was a slow, creeping biological fact. The mate bond was a symbiotic tether. By severing it so violently, and by putting hundreds of miles between herself and the alpha whose soul was meant to anchor hers, Lisa was essentially starving her inner wolf. The phantom pain in her chest had dulled into a constant, crushing exhaustion. Her body temperature had dropped. Her once vibrant eyes were hollow and shadowed. "You are the architect of my reign, Lisa." Cassian's voice drifted into her memory, unbidden and agonizing. It was a fragment from a year ago, the night before he took the Alpha title. They had been in the Pack's private conservatory. He had pressed her against the glass, his hands tangled in her hair, promising her the world. "I don't need a Luna to look pretty on a throne. I need you to lead my people beside me. The elders will see reason." He had lied. Or perhaps he had just been a coward when the political pressure finally mounted. Either way, the result was the same. Lisa violently snapped the stem of a rose, throwing the broken flower into the waste bin. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Survival was her only directive now. Across the city, high in the penthouse suite of a luxury downtown hotel, survival was the last thing on Cassian's mind. He was completely consumed by the hunt. The suite had been transformed into a tactical command center. Multiple monitors glowed in the dim light, displaying traffic camera feeds, facial recognition software, and police scanners. Marcus stood behind a bank of computers, coordinating with 3 teams of elite trackers disguised as civilians down on the streets. Cassian stood entirely still by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the relentless Portland rain. He wore a dark, tailored suit, but the refined clothing couldn't hide the feral, predatory tension radiating from his frame. He looked like a caged beast, his jaw clenched so tightly it threatened to crack. "Nothing on the facial recognition yet," Marcus said, rubbing his tired eyes. "She's keeping her head down. No credit card usage, no digital footprint. It's like she ceased to exist the moment she stepped off that bus." "She didn't cease to exist," Cassian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated against the glass. "She ran my intelligence network for 2 years, Marcus. She knows exactly how we hunt. She knows our algorithms. She knows our blind spots. Then how do we catch a ghost?" "We don't look for the ghost." Cassian turned, his gray eyes flashing with unnatural amber light. "We look for the shadow she casts. She's cut off from the Pack. Her bond is broken. She will be experiencing biological fallout. Fatigue, suppressed healing, the cold. Look for cash rentals in industrial zones. Look for jobs in environments that naturally mask thermal and scent signatures. Meat packing plants, commercial freezers, floral warehouses." Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked up at Cassian, a flicker of genuine awe cutting through his exhaustion. The Alpha King wasn't just using brute force. He was leveraging his intimate knowledge of the woman he loved. "Filtering parameters now," Marcus said, his keystrokes echoing in the quiet room. Cassian turned back to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. The city below was a labyrinth of concrete and neon, but it didn't matter. He could feel the vast, empty space in his soul pulling him in a specific direction. He was going to find her. And when he did, he would never let her out of his sight again. The bell above the door of the Emerald Apothecary chimed lightly. It was a cramped, dusty shop in the Pearl District, smelling heavily of dried sage, myrrh, and old paper. The human proprietor, an elderly woman who thought she was selling holistic remedies to hipsters, barely looked up from her knitting as Lisa walked in. Lisa kept her head down, the collar of her damp coat pulled up to her cheekbones. She moved straight to the back of the store, to a locked glass cabinet labeled Botanical Curiosities. Her hands were shaking. The pain in her chest had escalated over the last 48 hours from a dull ache to a sharp, burning agony that made it difficult to breathe. She knew what it meant. Cassian was close. The proximity of her mate was causing the dormant, broken bond to blindly reach out, trying to reestablish the connection. It was like rubbing sandpaper against an open nerve. "Excuse me," Lisa called out, her voice raspy. "I need the raw Aconitum napellus, the monk's hood root." The old woman peered over her spectacles. "That's not for consumption, dear. It's highly toxic. I only sell it for, well, decorative historical purposes." "I know. It's for an art project." Lisa lied smoothly, pulling a crisp $100 bill from her pocket and laying it flat on the glass counter. "I'll take everything you have in stock." 5 minutes later, Lisa stepped back out into the rain, clutching a small brown paper bag. Inside were dried, gnarled roots of pure wolfsbane. For a werewolf, ingesting wolfsbane was akin to drinking liquid fire. It was a potent neurotoxin, but in microscopic doses. Brewed into a tea, it acted as a brutal, chemical suppressor. It would numb her nervous system. It would temporarily kill her inner wolf. And more importantly, it would completely sever the psychic distress beacon her body was currently broadcasting to the Alpha King. She would rather poison herself than let him drag her back to a life of submission. Less than an hour after Lisa left the apothecary, the shop bell chimed again. The elderly proprietor looked up and immediately froze. The man who had just entered did not belong in her dusty little shop. He was massive, built with the lethal, fluid grace of an apex predator. His dark suit was damp from the rain, and his eyes, a terrifying, swirling storm of gray and gold, locked onto her with a paralyzing intensity. 2 other men, built like linebackers, stood silently outside the shop window, watching the street. Cassian stepped up to the counter. The air in the shop seemed to grow heavy, oxygen thinning under the crushing weight of his presence. He didn't speak immediately. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Beneath the overwhelming stench of sage and incense, his enhanced senses caught it. It was incredibly faint, masked by the smell of commercial refrigeration and eucalyptus. But it was there. Pine, rain, and underneath that, the sharp, metallic tang of his mate's physical distress. Cassian's eyes snapped open. He looked down at the glass counter. "A woman was here," Cassian said. His voice was perfectly level, but it carried a harmonic frequency that made the glass display cases vibrate slightly. Dark hair, pale, about 5'6". She paid in cash. The proprietor swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she lowered her knitting. She felt an overwhelming primal urge to submit to the man in front of her, even though she didn't understand why. Yes, about an hour ago." "What did she buy?" Just some herbs. Aconitum napellus, monk's hood root." Cassian went entirely rigid. The name of the plant hung in the air like a death sentence. Behind him, the shop door opened, and Marcus stepped in. "Cassian?" Marcus asked, sensing the sudden, catastrophic shift in his alpha's demeanor. "She bought wolfsbane," Cassian whispered, the color draining from his face. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden counter, the wood groaning and splintering under his fingers. Marcus cursed under his breath. "She's trying to mask her scent completely. Cassian, if she doses herself improperly, without a pack healer to monitor the toxicity. She's trying to kill the bond," Cassian interrupted, his voice breaking. The horrifying reality crashed over him. Lisa wasn't just running away. She was actively trying to destroy the biological anchor that tied her to him, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. She would rather drink poison than belong to him. The realization ripped away the last shreds of his civilized control. "Rip the security cameras," Cassian snarled, turning to Marcus, his face contorted in a mask of pure, desperate fury. "Track the direction she walked. I don't care about discretion anymore. Shut down the grid in a 5-block radius. We are finding her now." The alleyway was narrow, choked with overflowing dumpsters, and slick with centuries of grime and rain. Lisa hurried down the dark corridor, her boots splashing through deep puddles. Her apartment, a windowless, illegal sublet in a basement, was only 2 blocks away. She just needed to get inside. She needed to boil the water. She needed the tea. Suddenly, her knees buckled. It wasn't a trip or a slip. It was a massive, concussive force that struck her squarely in the chest, entirely invisible. Lisa gasped, falling forward, her palms tearing open on the rough, wet asphalt. The brown paper bag tumbled from her grip, the dried wolfsbane roots spilling into a puddle, the silence in her mind, the agonizing void she had lived with for 3 weeks, shattered. It was replaced by a roaring, golden fire. The mate bond didn't just reconnect. It exploded to life with violent, desperate intensity. The sheer power of it stole the oxygen from her lungs. She could feel his heartbeat. She could feel his panic, his fury, and his overwhelming, suffocating love. He was here. Lisa scrambled backward, her breath coming in ragged, terrified heaves. She pressed her back against the damp brick wall of the alley, her eyes wide as she stared into the shadows at the end of the corridor. The shadows moved. Cassian stepped into the dim, flickering light of a broken street lamp. He looked devastating. The Alpha King, usually immaculate and composed, looked like he had been dragged through hell. His suit was ruined. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They were glowing, full amber, his wolf pushed entirely to the surface, staring at her with a ravenous, possessive hunger that made her instincts scream. "Lisa," he breathed. The sound of her name on his lips sent a treacherous thrill of warmth straight to her core. A biological betrayal she fought with everything she had. He took a step forward. "Stop!" Lisa screamed, her voice cracking. She pushed herself up, using the brick wall for support. Her legs were shaking so violently she could barely stand. Cassian froze, his hands raising in a placating gesture, though his muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring. "I'm not going to hurt you. I've been looking for you. For 3 weeks, Lisa, I've been tearing the continent apart." "You shouldn't have," she spat, her eyes darting toward the street, looking for an exit. There was none. Marcus and 2 other enforcers had just materialized at the mouth of the alley, blocking her only escape route. She was trapped. "You left me," Cassian said, his voice raw, laced with genuine pain. He took another slow step toward her. The air pressure around him was oppressive, the natural dominance of an alpha commanding her to submit, to fall to her knees and accept her mate. "You vanished without a word. You made your choice on that stage." Lisa fired back, the anger finally breaking through her panic. "You chose Alara. You chose the Silver Crescent. You chose a crown over me." It was politics. It meant nothing. Cassian roared, the sheer volume of his voice rattling the windows of the buildings above them. "I was trying to save our people from a war. I thought you understood the burden of the throne. You are my mate. You are my soul. A piece of paper with another pack doesn't change that." "It changes everything," Lisa cried, tears finally mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Did you expect me to be your dirty secret? To wait in the shadows while you paraded another woman as your equal? I have too much pride for that, Cassian. I was your equal. Now, I am nothing to you." "You are everything to me," he growled, losing the battle with his control. He lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion. He reached for her, desperate to pull her into his arms, to physically force the bond to soothe them both. He expected her to fight him. He expected her to punch, to kick, to try and run. He didn't expect the flash of silver. Cassian stopped dead, his chest heaving mere inches from her. Lisa stood perfectly still, her eyes dead and cold. In her right hand, gripped tightly, was a tactical blade forged from pure, refined silver. It was lethal to their kind. But she wasn't pointing it at Cassian. She had the sharp edge of the silver blade pressed firmly against her own throat, right over her carotid artery. The rain poured down around them. The alley fell into an agonizing, horrified silence. Marcus, at the end of the alley, swore loudly and took a step forward. But Cassian threw his hand back, signaling him to stop. Cassian stared at the silver blade biting into his mate's pale skin. A single drop of blood, black in the dim light, welled up and trailed down her neck. "Lisa," Cassian whispered, his voice trembling with absolute terror. The feral alpha was instantly gone, replaced by a man watching his entire world threaten to end itself. "Put the knife down." "You made me a rogue, Cassian," Lisa said softly, her voice devoid of any emotion. Her hand didn't shake. "You severed me from my home. Now you expect me to return and wag my tail like a kept pet? I won't do it. I will cancel the treaty. I will send Ilara back. I will give up the throne if I have to," Cassian pleaded, sinking slowly to his knees in the dirty, wet alleyway, his hands raised in total surrender. "Just, please, don't take yourself from me. Please." Lisa looked down at the Alpha King, kneeling in the mud at her feet. The man who ruled thousands was begging for her life. But the scars of his betrayal ran deep, and the silver blade remained pressed against her throat. "Give me one reason," Lisa whispered, the rain masking her tears. "Why I shouldn't just end this right now." "Give me one reason," Lisa whispered, the rain masking the hot, bitter tears that finally spilled over her lashes. "Why I shouldn't just end this right now." Cassian remained on his knees in the filth of the alleyway. The Alpha King, a man who commanded legions and whose mere presence could force lesser wolves into submission, was completely paralyzed. His chest heaved with ragged, panicked breaths. He stared at the bead of black blood welling beneath the silver blade at her throat. The metallic scent of it hit his heightened senses like a physical blow, mixing sickeningly with the smell of rain and decaying garbage. He didn't speak immediately. He knew that words were utterly useless here. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of political rhetoric, twisting words to secure alliances and maintain power. But rhetoric had broken the woman he loved. Rhetoric had driven her to this cold, wet alley with poison in her pocket and silver at her neck. Slowly, telegraphing every millimeter of his movement so as not to startle her, Cassian reached inside his ruined suit jacket. Lisa's grip on the blade tightened. Her knuckles went stark white. "Don't." "I am not drawing a weapon," Cassian said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely cut through the sound of the downpour. "I am answering your question." He withdrew his smartphone. It was a heavy, encrypted device, used only for pack emergencies and high-level council communications. With slow, deliberate fingers, he bypassed the security lock and dialed a single number. He pressed the speaker icon and placed the phone carefully on the wet asphalt between them. The phone rang twice. Then, the sharp, authoritative voice of Elder Thorn echoed into the rainy alley. "Alpha, where are you? The pack is in chaos. Ilara's father has called 3 times demanding to know why you abandoned the estate. If you do not return and formalize this union by midnight, the Silver Crescent will consider the alliance null and void. They are threatening to mobilize their borders." Lisa stared at the phone, her heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The mere sound of Thorn's voice brought a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. Cassian didn't look at the phone. His glowing amber eyes remained locked onto Lisa's face. "Tell the Silver Crescent Alpha," Cassian said, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, absolute calm, "that if his daughter and his retinue are not off my lands by sunrise, I will consider them hostile trespassers. The treaty is broken." A heavy, stunned silence emanated from the speaker. Then, Thorn exploded. Are you out of your mind? Cassian, you are inviting a slaughter. The Southern Coalition will tear through our weakened borders if we don't have the Silver Crescent's numbers. You are sacrificing the crown for a rogue. No, Cassian replied softly, his eyes never leaving Lisa. I am sacrificing the crown for my mate. Before Thorn could utter another word, Cassian brought his heavy boot down on the phone. The glass and internal casing shattered with a sharp crunch, killing the connection instantly. Lisa flinched, but the silver blade remained pressed to her skin. A broken phone doesn't change anything, Cassian. They will still call you king. They will still expect you to rule, and I will not be ruled. I know, Cassian breathed. He reached toward his right hand. Slowly, he gripped the massive, heavy gold signet ring that sat on his index finger. It was the ancestral crest of his bloodline. It was the physical manifestation of the Alpha's authority. To remove it outside of a formal challenge was unthinkable. It was a direct severing of his legal claim to the pack. He slid the heavy gold band off his finger. The metal caught a brief flicker of light from the broken street lamp above. With a flick of his wrist, Cassian tossed the priceless artifact into a deep, muddy puddle near a rusted dumpster. It sank instantly, swallowed by the dark water. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the end of the alley. Marcus and the enforcers had witnessed the unthinkable. Their king had just voluntarily abdicated in the middle of a human city. I am no longer king, Cassian said, the rain washing over his pale face, pasting his dark hair to his forehead. He opened his empty hands, displaying them to her. I have no pack. I have no army. I have no crown. I am just a wolf, unclaimed, unprotected, just like you. The absolute finality of his action slammed into Lisa. The golden thread of their mate bond, which had been screaming in agony for weeks, suddenly flared with a pure, blinding truth. He wasn't lying. He had stripped himself of everything that had stood between them. The adrenaline that had been keeping Lisa upright suddenly evaporated. The physical toll of the cold, the near starvation of her wolf, and the sheer emotional whiplash hit her all at once. Her fingers went numb. The silver tactical blade slipped from her grasp, clattering uselessly against the asphalt. Her knees buckled. She didn't brace for the fall. She simply let the darkness take her. But she didn't hit the ground. Cassian moved with the desperate speed of a dying man, reaching for oxygen. He caught her before she struck the wet pavement, gathering her limp, freezing body into his chest. He buried his face in her damp hair, letting out a ragged, shattering sob as he finally held his soul again. Warmth. It was the first sensation that broke through the heavy, suffocating darkness. It wasn't just the physical warmth of heavy cotton blankets. It was a deep, resonant heat radiating from the very center of her chest. The agonizing void that had consumed her for 21 days was gone. In its place, the mate bond hummed, a steady, golden vibration that felt like a localized sun burning within her ribcage. Lisa slowly peeled her eyes open. The light in the room was dim and golden. She was lying in a massive plush bed. The faint, sterile smell of an IV drip mingled with the expensive scent of lavender and polished wood. It was a high-end hotel suite, not the pack house. She turned her head slightly. Cassian was sitting in a heavy armchair by the window, entirely still. He was no longer wearing the ruined suit. He wore simple dark sweatpants and a gray t-shirt, his feet bare. He looked devastatingly exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes resembled bruises, and a heavy shadow of stubble coated his jaw. He was staring out at the city skyline, giving her space, not daring to crowd her upon waking. Cassian. Her voice was a dry, papery whisper. He moved instantly, crossing the room with silent, predatory grace. But he stopped 3 feet from the edge of the bed. He clamped his hands tightly behind his back, a physical restraint against his wolf's screaming instinct to touch her, to scent her, to ensure she was truly alive. I'm here, he said, his voice remarkably gentle. You're in the penthouse of the Roosevelt. I brought a neutral pack healer from the Olympic territory to flush your system. You were severely dehydrated, and your core temperature was dangerously low. You've been asleep for 2 days. Lisa processed the information slowly. She looked down at the back of her hand, where a small bandage covered an IV puncture. She remembered the alley. She remembered the rain. She remembered the heavy gold ring sinking into the muddy water. You threw away your ring, she said softly. Cassian's jaw ticked. It was the cheapest price I have ever paid for anything of actual value. He finally allowed himself to step closer, sinking onto the very edge of the mattress. The mattress dipped under his considerable weight. Lisa, I need you to understand. I was terrified. The Southern Pax had formed a coalition. Their troop movements near our southern border had tripled in 2 months. Thorn showed me the intelligence reports. We were looking at a massacre. The Silver Crescent had an army sitting idle. I thought I was choosing the survival of our people. I was arrogant enough to believe you would understand the political theater of it. Lisa closed her eyes, letting his deep, resonant voice wash over her. Her analytical mind, honed by years of running his intelligence network, began to churn. The fog of exhaustion parted slightly. The Southern Coalition, Lisa murmured, her brow furrowing. Cassian, when did Thorn first show you those intelligence reports? Late September. Why? Lisa forced herself to sit up, ignoring the dull ache in her muscles. She pulled the heavy blanket up to her collarbone. I ran the border surveillance network until the night I left. The Southern Pax didn't triple their movements in September. They were completely dormant. They were actually facing a severe internal famine. Cassian went very still. Thorn presented me with satellite imagery, intercepted communications. It was irrefutable. It was fabricated, Lisa said, the realization clicking into place with the sharp, cold precision of a loading gun. She looked directly into Cassian's eyes. Think about the timeline. Thorn brings you evidence of a catastrophic threat in late September. You panic. 3 days later, Alpha Corvin of the Silver Crescent miraculously reaches out with a treaty offer, contingent on a marriage to his daughter. An offer that solves a problem that didn't actually exist. Cassian's breath hitched. The blood drained from his face as the magnitude of her words settled over him. Thorn and Corvin engineered the crisis. Lisa continued, her voice gaining strength, the natural authority of the intelligence chief returning to her posture. Thorn wanted you married to Alara because Corvin promised Thorn a seat on the High Council of the newly merged Super PAC. They manipulated you, Cassian. They used your desire to protect our people against you. A terrifying silence descended upon the hotel suite. Cassian stared at the floor. When he finally looked up, his eyes were completely devoid of human gray. They were a solid, glowing, predatory amber. The sheer volume of rage rolling off his body was enough to make the air pressure in the room drop. He had shattered his own soul. He had driven the woman he loved to the brink of suicide. He had abdicated his throne, and he had done it all over a lie. Thorn, Cassian whispered, the name sounding like a death sentence. He played you, Lisa said, reaching out to gently touch his clenched fist. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure electricity through the bond, grounding him slightly, but he only won if I stayed gone. Cassian turned his hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, holding on as if she were the only solid object in a collapsing universe. I threw away the ring, Lisa. I broke the treaty. By pack law, I am a rogue. Thorn will use this to declare himself regent. Let him try, Lisa said, a dangerous, beautiful smirk touching the corner of her lips. The storm had passed. The heavy oak doors of the grand estate shattered inward, not from a siege, but from the sheer, undeniable force of the returning king and his chosen equal. Cassian walked through the splintered wood, his hand locked tightly with Lisa's. There was no ring on his finger, but the suffocating predatory dominance radiating from them both brought the usurping elders to their knees before a single word was spoken. Lisa didn't stand in the shadows this time. She stood at the center of the dais, a blade of silver and strategy, ready to rebuild an empire on her own terms. The hunt was over, but their reign had just begun. If you felt the heat of this dramatic alpha romance and loved Lisa's fierce comeback, please like, share, and subscribe for more intense cinematic stories. Drop a comment below on what you thought of Cassian's ultimate sacrifice in the alley.